Or do we get started? Oh, we go. Greetings and welcome to this catch-up. I'm your host, Craig Waters. You can find me at CSWaters1 on the Twitters. Basically, I've got a really good special guest on today. I'm going to reveal a bit about it, but he basically was recently a keynote speaker at the Melbourne VMware User Group, so you probably know who it is if you went there. Otherwise, special guest, if you could introduce yourself, that'd be great, yeah?
Hey, Craig, thanks for having me. I am John Mark Troyer, or John Troyer, J Troyer on Twitter, if that works better for anybody. I'm really pleased to be here.
Thanks, John. So I was kind of hoping to have a catch-up with you at the VMUG, but I guess as a VMUG leader, there's kind of so much going on, I just really didn't get a chance to pin you down. So typical format for me for the vCatchup, I've got about 6 questions that I've put together, and I want to just jump into those. But there's one thing I did want to ask you first, though, John, and that was like, if there's a lasting impression that you took away from being in Australia, because I understand it was your first visit there. So
yeah. Wow. Well, it was hot, but not that bad. No, I really loved the VMUGs. Sydney was beautiful, of course, and the Sydney VMUG was good, but the Melbourne VMUG was really I could tell it was something special. You have a good leadership group. You guys are all liking each other and working with each other. The venue itself was good. I mean, the energy was good at the VMUG. So I was just kind of impressed by the Melbourne VMUG in general. But you know, Australia was great. Everyone was friendly. I had a lot of flat whites, and they were also very good.
That's good to hear. And no drop beers, which is kind of important.
No, exactly. Well, they told me to put a little, eucalyptus oil behind each ear.
Classic, yeah. Brilliant. Okay, let's jump into the questions anyway then. So the first one, I really wanted to kind of get your perspective around the whole tech reckoning. So, your current role is as Chief Tech Reckoner, and I just wanted to get an understanding of what that actually consists of, and maybe you could talk a bit about like kind of what projects you're doing and, really where you want to take it and what the concept is around it, yeah?
Sure. Well, when I was at VMware, I was working with community, with the vExpert program that I started, with the online community, with social media, with the VMUGs. And as I talked with people out in the community, people told me they had needs to have conversations that were not quite appropriate inside the silo that is VMware, right? The VMware silo the community is very great, the silo is very good, but it is a silo, right? We're supposed to talk about VMware things at a VMUG, right? And if you're at a Cisco user group, you're talking about Cisco things. And if you're at an EMC user group, you're talking about EMC things. And so there are conversations as IT professionals that we want to have that cross those barriers. And that's people ask me, John, can you make a place that we could do something like that? And that's why I started Tech Reckoning. We've started with a mailing list. It's a newsletter. It comes out every week or two. I'm a little bit behind, but there was one out last week. There's about 1,000 people in the newsletter. It's a people tell me it's interesting. Sometimes I go on for 2,000 or 3,000 words, but it's a little bit of my take on what's going on in the world that week. Some links to read, and it's not like a news thing. It's more like a hey, let's think about this topic sort of thing. So what I've tried to do is use that as a bridge to get where we're going. And where we're going is more of a community site, and it's not up yet, and we're working on it. So a place to have kind of higher level enterprise conversations about deeply technical topics or about higher level topics that are not appropriate. It's not about how to configure vSAN. It's about what is the implication of software-defined storage in small business or large business, or how is software-defined networking going to affect things? What are containers doing with things? How do you actually run an IT department that makes it effective? Sorts of things like that. So that site is coming, and actually I'll announce it here. It may, by the time this gets published, it may be out there as well. But we're also going to have actually our first event this year. I was going to
ask about that. Yeah, cool. Could you tell us a bit more about that then, John?
Sure. On July 26th and 27th, people will be coming out to Half Moon Bay, California, which is where I live. So I made it convenient for me. Anyway, I don't know about for you. You might have a long flight. But we're going to have a one-day event, day and a half. The first day people are going to show up. It'll be a little bit of an unconference. We might do some Brown Bag stuff. Start off with some podcast-style conversations that night, and then the next day have a bunch of small conversations on 3 areas. One, how to run an IT department. DevOps, diversity, how to be effective as an IT professional. 2, uh, how to how to be a technology communicator, right? If you're a blogger, or even if you're just a regular technology professional, you have to learn how to communicate to be effective at your job, whether with the business side of the house or even just in your own career with your boss. And then 3, technologists as entrepreneurs. Because whether it's starting something inside your own company or joining a startup or being, starting your own kind of startup, that is its own journey. And I think technologists these days, with all the tools we have, with all the kind of disruption in the technology space, people who actually know the technology have an advantage and have a lot of power. So those are the topics we'll be talking about.
Wow, that's really interesting. Actually, that's an interesting perspective. I was going to say, with what I found with the Tech Reckoning newsletter is it is very diverse, and I've actually quite enjoyed that. That you pick items of interest that you obviously find interesting, but it's kind of a real diverse perspective, and it's not that whole, you kind of put a nail on the head with it there, saying, oh, it's not about how to configure vSAN, it's more broader range conversations, and I think that's kind of the challenge within IT at the moment is that there's no platform to have those conversations. All you have is you kind of have the two ends. You've got the analysts that that kind of generalize what technologies are available and how they should be used, and then you've got the extreme technologists who are then deep diving and talking about how to change settings and how to configure this. So there is a big gap in the middle. Do you think then from that, I mean, just really around this whole, I've heard you speak about it a bit before, but the whole missing piece in the middle around there not being, there's no, the changes with the media as far as Google coming along, and then printed media not having as much relevance these days, magazines and stuff. There's no real place for an IT professional or an IT manager running an IT shop actually to go and find out about a technology other than going to the vendor's website direct and and going straight to the coalface sort of thing. So is that what you're trying to address? That kind of gap? Or?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. That's certainly one piece of it. I mean, even the vendors have told me, we need geeks. We can't explain things without geeks. And the way that the purchasing cycle works now for for technology or for anything, even laundry soap, right? Is that the studies say between 2/3 or even more of the decision-making process happens before you pick up the phone and call anybody. So marketers are realizing they can't send out more emails, they can't do more Google ads, they can't do more webinars. There's just not enough time in the day. People are just tuning all that out. They need geeks to explain it to other geeks to actually get some traction and some mind share, so that even they get considered for to sell their things. And so that's why I say technologists have a lot of power. I mean, but basically, Craig, I just wanted a place to hang out with my friends. And so all this construct is all there to so that I can hang out with people that I think are interesting.
That's a really good way to put it. I like that a lot. What do you see that going? I mean, obviously with your event, this is the first event that you put together. I guess it's like you're saying, it's going to be close by to where you are. It's going to be a bunch of people that coming together. But where do you see that going then? Because again, you've identified another market in the industry that's missing is this whole. There's a ton of events out there, but they're always very focused on a specific vendor or a specific technology. So to be able to then have this wider conversation and have this, I mean, are you looking for sponsorship for this event? How are you actually going to pay for it? So I'm asking you 26 different questions here, but I'll let you.
Sure. Well, if we manage to bring people together in an interesting way, whether that's online or at an event, that is inherently interesting to vendors. If we can introduce that conversation in a respectful way, not by just having the vendors yell at people, not by just grabbing people's emails and calling them, these are new leads, we're going to spam you now. If we can have a respectful dialogue, I mean, much like what Stephen Foskett does with Tech Field Day, and there's some other events that are similar. If we can do that, we'll succeed in making some money. And I don't need a lot of money, right? But there's some value created there, and I can create a business out of that. That's all we're trying to do. If it's very community oriented. It's about if I feel like the more I can give back to the community, the more this thing will work. So we're not sweating the details. I haven't taken any venture capital investment, even though I'm sitting right by all the venture capitalists in the world. Right, I haven't taken, $300 million like some companies. I just have so I can support myself with consulting, and we'll just let it grow naturally. I mean, there are times when these things work, and they don't even have to be forever institutions, right? I mean, think about the impact of Slashdot back in the day, right? It was very impactful on culture, on how companies grew up. Think of the impact of Hacker News the past few years. So these communities can spring up and be very interesting, and they don't even have to live forever to still be interesting. So that's all we're trying to do. Let's let it grow naturally.
That's great. It's a really interesting perspective. I'm looking forward to it, John. I hope I can get over. We'll see what happens here. It might line up just right with another thing that's going on at the moment. So.
Well, good. It's only a few $100s, and I'm positioning it as a professional development seminar day. So your work should pay for
it. Brilliant. I'm looking forward to it. Yeah. Okay. So next question. I mean, kind of around some sort of thing there we've just talked about, but just really, I wanted to kind of explore your background just a little bit because I looked you up on LinkedIn and I kind of there's some gem there. So again, don't. If there's something coming up that you're not happy with, I'm happy to move on from it. But I really wanted to, I noticed there, you've got your background in sciences. You've said before about having a PhD. My wife's actually got a PhD in chemistry as well, so I know what going through that PhD process feels like, even though it was like secondhand, but it was still pretty full on. I've seen you've done some wireless development. I've seen you've actually done some startup consulting as well, which is interesting. So I'm just kind of really curious as to how the heck did you end up being a communities expert for VMware? Like, how do you get there? Like, we all have these career path projections of how we go, but how the hell did you get there, man?
Well, it wasn't straight, and I don't think anybody's career is a straight line anymore. Well, you kind of laid out the trajectory, right? I got a degree, I got a PhD in pharmaceutical chemistry, but it was mostly computer chemistry. And while I was doing computer chemistry...
Sorry, just layman's... Sure. Can you define computer chemistry? Sorry.
Well, it was all in the computer, so it was all simulation, IDD work. We had an early Evans and Sutherland workstation that made vector graphics on the screen, 3D vector graphics on the screen. In fact, at UCSF there on the West Coast, we were the only Evans and Sutherland workstation. So they used that. If you remember Star Trek, I think it was 2. They had the Genesis device.
Yeah, right.
And for the Genesis device, they had an animation of a rotating DNA molecule. And the lab where I worked was the one where they shot that because that was the only place on the West Coast that could do a real-time rotating 3D DNA molecule. So we looked at a lot of stuff in 3D. We had funny goggles. I did all that 3D stuff back in the 90s. Frankly, it gives me a headache. And we were looking at protein structures and their three-dimensional structures, and then how drugs fit into the protein to take effect. And so a lot of my work was on simulation. I did a lot of numerical simulation. I wrote a lot of Fortran. I did some literate programming. I worked with a bunch of scripting languages. I worked with neural nets. I worked with genetic algorithms. I did some big supercomputer run on Crays. So it was a lot of simulation, kind of number crunching around in the biological space. And so but at the same time I was doing that, this little old thing, I was on Usenet. I was a big Usenet guy. And there was the Well, and so there was a lot of online communities that I'd already been either was aware of or was participating in. And so, and then at the same time, Gopher popped up, and then all of a sudden, I saw that Mark Andreessen, this guy at the University of Illinois, had put out this browser called Mosaic, and it was version 0.7 or 8 in 1993, and it was pretty cool. And I remember the first time I showed somebody. I took it over to my friend, another graduate student. I said, look, this is the coolest thing in the world. So we had to compile it for AIX first to install it on his workstation. We installed it on his workstation. It came up. I showed him the calendar for the Science Fiction Book Club of MIT, and then we clicked over and saw a Swiss train table, and then it crashed. And he looked at me and said, Troyer, this is the most stupid thing you have ever shown me. I can't believe you just wasted my time with this BS. So, I was a little bit ahead of my time, why don't we say. So I was very interested in online stuff and blog. That was the blogs were starting to come up soon after that. And I was more of a reader than a writer myself, but at least I knew what was going on. So then, let's see, let's make a long story short, after an interim where I started a venture-backed software company, we eventually raised $25 million to tackle the enterprise wireless space, but that was pre-iPhone, so nothing really worked very well. You didn't really want to have a web browser on a BlackBerry, even though we had money from RIM at the time. And then I bounced around Silicon Valley trying to get some stuff going. We looked at a patent IP startup and a couple of other startups, bioinformatics startup. But then so I was looking for something to do, and there was this gig at VMware. And at first I didn't want to do it, and so I didn't have any money coming in. But a friend of ours was a recruiter there and said, "Hey, I have a role that might be right for John." I told my wife, I'm not going to go down and interview for that job because it sounds stupid. It's too far away from our house. I am not an infrastructure person. I am a wireless application person. I've never heard of this company called VMware, and I don't want to, work down there. And she looked at me and said, "No, you're going on the interview." So I went down to the interview, and it turned out to be a really interesting job. I was only going to take it for a year, and it was basically we had this community. The community had started in 2002 or 3, VMTN, the forum site. But they saw that social media was coming, and at that time, actually, blogs were coming. And they're like, how can we blog, and how can we work with other people who are blogging? And so my job was basically to go out and try to figure out how to get blogs going for VMware. That was my first gig. And I was only going to stay for a year, and I was going to pop out and start another company. And it just turned out to be a lot of fun. I mean, you're sitting there in the middle of the industry with everything, all the OEMs and all the computer makers are working with you, right? All the server makers, and then all the application makers and all the infrastructure makers. And I'm like, wait a minute. One, why should I leave? Because I'm sitting here at the middle of everything. And then two, everybody loves VMware. Why should I go someplace where I'm not loved? As a startup founder, you're standing, and you guys are a big start. You're working for a big startup, but you know how a startup is. You're standing on a box yelling, look at me, somebody please pay attention to me. All of a sudden at VMware, you're on a very big stage, right? You can just whisper. You can say, "Hey," and everyone stops and goes, "What do you want? Yes, please. What do you want to tell us?" So all of a sudden, I had a big stage. I had an audience of people who really, really loved us, and we were making their lives better. We had those I love VMware bumper stickers. We had, one of the first things I Googled in VMware-related blogs was somebody had written a blog, and they said, "I have seen the face of God, and it is VMware." I mean, you can't pay for that stuff, right? So I was having a blast, and so I ended up at VMware 8.5 years. I had a blast the whole time.
I guess that 8.5 years was a very critical time as well. That a lot of things happened, and that it was. What am I trying to say? It's kind of like you look at IT, and it was kind of a very transformative period.
Yeah. Oh no, the things that we did in 2005, 6, 7 for VMware. That was in a time, in a place, and for VMware. So people sometimes ask me, how can we do what VMware did with community and with bloggers and with vExperts? And I'm like, well, you can't, because it's not 2005, 6, 7, 8, 9, and you're not VMware. So you have to do something that's true to your own company and true to yourself, right? You can't replicate. The conditions are not the same as they were 10 years ago.
Yeah, sure. I guess that was kind of a big point you make there. Is the fact that it was about the social media actually coming of age and it becoming like a platform. Like you talked about blogging. There's 3 or 4 events that occurred at that point in time, which kind of like affected the outcome for VMware specifically as well. For a lot of organizations too.
Yeah, and we were early onto Twitter in 2009, not early Silicon Valley terms, but early in general audience terms. I think in VMworld 2009, maybe I started to get people onto Twitter, so I started to pull all those people who are on VMTN and the forums over into the Twitter sphere for VMworld, and we kept pulling people over and pulling people over. So to this day, I think VMware-ish people, infrastructure-ish people, virtualization-ish people have a different experience on Twitter than other people, because a lot of people get on Twitter, they don't know who to follow, they don't know what to do, They follow a few friends, and maybe they follow, Kanye West and Barack Obama, but what else do you do, right? And so Kim Kardashian, I suppose, is who I would follow. But the virtualization people have a whole lot of people who are on Twitter and active, and so it kind of has functioned for us as like a floating IRC or chat room, right? That there's a lot of people that know each other and talk to each other, so it's a little bit easier for a newcomer to get drawn into that conversation, and it's more interesting. Now, Twitter is not great for everything, and frankly, I'm kind of over it. I can't really have a very good conversation there, which is one reason I'm starting up this new site. But it does give value if you're an IT professional to be there and to be hooked up with this set of VMware people. And I don't see quite the same thing in like the Microsoft universe or the Oracle universe or some of these others. But I'll take some credit for it, I guess. Part of it was just the community itself, right? But we managed to do a good job of being there, and all being available for each other.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the key word there, is that the community piece. I think you kind of talked about at the beginning with the Melbourne VMware user group, and that's kind of what we found is it's about promoting those people that are local to you, and then building that that ecosystem around that event. It almost doesn't matter whether it's a VMware user group or whether it's any other user group. It's about getting those people together and having that standard platform for them all to communicate on. Yeah. So, but I think Twitter's a kind of a really important part of that. I mean, I do a slide like a community toolkit slide, which is basically talking about blogging and tweeting, and really why you should blog and the benefits of it, and then why you should use Twitter. And I always say with Twitter, the beauty with Twitter is that you can get on there and you can ask somebody who you may not even know, but who has relevance within a particular technology piece or something, and it's a win-win it's a win for you to go and ask them, and it's a win for them to actually respond, because it's showing that vendor's actually like communicating with its customer, that sort of thing. So it's kind of a mutually agreeable platform, which I think that's kind of been the challenge, especially here being in the Antipodes and being away from the core of what's going on in IT sometimes, is that it's really hard to find locally that expertise, and so to be able to jump on Twitter, all of a sudden you've got this global society that you can get into and actually get that feedback and that answer.
And I brought this up in the VMUG, right? There are some people in the Australian and New Zealand communities that are basically the world's experts, and you're an example, right? You're well known all over the world. You have developed a certain expertise, and you can draw on that network too. And so barrier in that sense, geography is not a barrier. But I have found, like you do with the VMUGs, right, that half of this stuff is face-to-face. Even though at VMware I was part of a digital marketing organization, only the last couple of years I finally realized that actually half my job was going to events. And so you use the in-person, you use the online to accelerate the relationship and cement the relationship during the times when you can't meet face-to-face, right? And it just they are very synergistic because you feel closer to people that you've kind of casually seen on Twitter when you finally meet them.
I always remember, so in Australia we have like the vForum, which is kind of an equivalent of a VM world. That I always remember the first time I went to one. I think it would have been 2008, somewhere around there. And I didn't know anybody, and I spent 2 days at this event, and I was like, I need to try and go to these events and meet these people. And then after that, Twitter kind of became a big part of my life, and since then I've never been to a conference where I've never known anybody. I've always, wherever you go, there's always someone there that you know. And I like that what you're saying about, it's about cementing that relationship. As humans, it just takes that small piece of interaction for us to get over this cliff of like whether someone's known to us or not known to us. And once you do that, you can go to these events and it's like your best mates, and you've known these people for 10 years. So it's pretty, it's a pretty special thing that's been created through social media.
And especially since so many of us IT kind of folks are kind of introverted too, right? So that helps a lot.
Well, I think the analogy I often use is the big fish in the little pond. So you work in an organization, and you may be the head honcho from an IT perspective because you know everything about IT, but within the realms of that organization, the sales, the marketing, the accounting team, the whatever different business unit, you, you know that specialism means nothing. So you're this special, you know, you have this specialist skill set, but it's just for a small group of people within that business. Whereas you go to these events and everybody's like that. Do you know what I mean? Everyone has
Right.
that. But then it's really hard to bridge the communications of what, you know, so what I do in my IT business compared to what you do in yours. And I think that's, you know, that's part of what the VMUG's done, what we've tried to do at the VMUG anyway, is that, do you know what, we're all suffering the same problems, we all have the same issues, and if you actually open up and be transparent and share that information, you'll actually find that somebody else there has already solved that problem in another way. And I think that's kind of where blogging came out. You know, you often see people will say, oh, you know, I had this problem the other day and I Googled it, and it was my blog that I looked at that had, you know, where I solved that problem. But that's kind of the point, is that you don't, no one's, you know, it's kind of changed from IT. You're not necessarily having these issues that you can't solve anymore, because there's always going to be someone that's already solved it, and that kind of creates that community where you can actually say, hey, you know, and getting back to the point, you know, you go to these VMUGs, you do these face-to-face stuff, and it's like saying, you know, we started doing agile workshops, you know, like, so we do roundtable discussions and we get people to choose topics when they come in, and they sit down and talk about the topic, you know. But the idea was that, like, yeah, the idea was then is that someone would pick a topic up, going, oh, you know, I'm trying to look for a new backup product and I'm having problems finding it. And then there were 6 people there already saying, oh, we just implemented this, or we looked at this product and it was really good. And this guy came away from that VMUG, and, you know, it's kind of a regular now. He came away there saying, you know, I actually got something out of this. It's not just a bunch of slides and, you know, and a vendor presentation. I actually got something valuable that I took away from it. So that's the power, I think, you know, for the face-to-face piece. Yeah.
Sure. Well, it goes back to what we said before, right? The market, that there was no marketer involved there. I mean, about those backup products, right? And that terrifies marketers, right? They were in the conversation only that they had influenced or sold to those other customers who were then talking to the prospects, right? There was no marketing material anywhere. That makes a marketer's palms start to sweat, right? It's a very scary prospect.
But isn't that then the whole influence the influencer piece then? Is because you are marketing, but you just not direct marketing. You kind of have a middleman between what you're doing, and so. Look, I tell you what, I've got the next question, and it kind of relates to all that part of it. And really, you know, I wanted to ask you about Geek Whisperers, and hence the, you know, what marketing is today. So you know, again, kind of a history bit. Like, so how did it actually come about? How did you guys get together? And, you know, there's been a lot of changes for you since you actually started out, and probably some of them are due to the fact that you started the Geek Whisperers podcast. But what was the I don't know, the kernel idea that kind of made it happen? And then have you seen a change in marketing practices, not necessarily directly because of what Geek Whisperers talks about, but more because of the analysis that you've done over that period of time, and that you know, have you influenced the marketers like you've influenced the influencers, or that? Yeah.
It's hard to say, right? I can't save the world, right? I try, but it's sometimes, you know, you feel like Don Quixote and going up against the windmills. There's only so much I can do. So the Geek Whisperers, we've been doing it for, I don't know, almost 2.5, 3 years. I'm not sure. It was a podcast that started when I ran into Amy Lewis at one of the VMworlds in Europe. And we got to talking, and of course, we had an amazing conversation right away, and we thought, hey, we should do something together. And I was thinking about starting a podcast. And the problem was that you know, we were both social media practitioners, right? We were both working in these roles that were thought of as social media. But when I would go to social media conferences or read social media blogs or all that sort of stuff, it didn't really resonate with me. I didn't enjoy what they were saying. It wasn't useful to me. It wasn't relevant. A lot of it was direct-to-consumer kind of stuff that wasn't really relevant for a community of practice or in a B2B setting like we had with the vExperts and the VMware community. And I just didn't like them. Right? It was all about, like, what time's the best time to tweet. It was a lot of tactical stuff. What time is the best time to tweet? And here's 5 things you should do to, you know, enhance your blog. And it's just kind of bullshit. It's not useful. I want to know, you know, how to connect with people and what to say, and how to think about what to say and what people find useful, or frameworks, you know, for thinking about this kind of stuff. So I guess I do have a little bit of an academic perspective. I don't just want, you know, laundry lists of you know, questionable marketing practices. So we all had that idea, and Amy had actually already been having a call with Matt, I think, where they were, collaborating a little bit. And so the three of us came together. We were the joke was we were a little bit of VCE, right? I was at VMware, Amy was at Cisco, and Matt was at EMC. But all three of us changed our jobs, within 2 years. And so we just started talking about our jobs and what we liked and didn't like and how we were approaching the problem, since we all seemed to be having some success approaching it. So it was trying to be on the interface between geeks and marketers, and how do marketers talk to geeks. Also, frankly, I thought that this was going to be a big career advantage for me, because all these marketers would listen to this and realize how brilliant I was, and I could come and give keynotes at these marketing conferences that I didn't like anyway. But you know what? It turns out that the audience for the Geek Whisperers was not the marketers, it was the geeks. What the marketers, we just confuse the marketers, because that's not the way they think, and they, depending on what department they're in, they're either worried about leads, or they're worried about brand stance, or they're not really community people from the get-go. And so they were kind of not very interested in what we had to say. But the geeks were kind of interested, because we were explaining how marketing departments work, and how PR departments work, and how geeks get to have influence with vendors, bloggers, and people like that. So that was interesting, and how to think about what's my personal brand versus my company brand, and how would I get a little visibility, and how could I advance my career by doing some of this blogging and social media stuff. So that actually turned out to be the audience for the Geek Whisperers rather than the marketers, unfortunately. So we didn't save anybody, Craig. We just we're just preaching to the crowd. Yeah. So recently, the past few months, we realized that we weren't really making traction with the marketers. So we actually pivoted the show a little bit, and for the last couple of months now, we've really been focused on technical people, and in fact technical leaders. And the idea is talk to technical people, especially technical leaders, CTOs, and people who are in senior technical positions, and ask them how they got there, and talk about their careers, and talk about not a resume, right? A resume is not interesting. That's too chronological. But kind of about what makes them tick. What it was in them that made and what were the situations and circumstances of their career path that had them get to the place where they're at. And so that's been fascinating. And I think one commonality that we found when we've done 10 of these now maybe, is that people who have advanced in their careers basically have worked really friggin' hard. They really are passionate about what they do, and they work extra hard. There's some other things, tricks, and there's some other ways they approach their job too. But in general, the people we really like their job, and they don't really know how they got where they got, but they weren't necessarily planning 10 steps out, but they found something today that they really liked, and they excelled at it. And then they went to the next thing, and the next thing, and the next thing. I think too often we get in our heads and we think, well, I'd like to be a VP someday, and so I should be doing this, or I'll do 5 years of this crappy job I don't like, and then I'll switch to the better job. I'll get promoted to the job I do like, things like that. When in fact, the right thing to do is, and this seems to be the commonality, is that be slightly obsessive about a very interesting project right now, and then see where that takes you. And some of them have said they, have admitted they work too hard, or they feel bad. They spent a few years working too hard and things like that. For them it paid off. There's a little bit of survivorship bias, and that we're talking to people where that worked out. We know I think we all know lots of workaholics that are just miserable, and it doesn't seem to work out for them. Working harder is not necessarily working smarter. But anyway, it's been some fascinating conversations. It really has been an interesting shift.
Yeah, no, I can't remember who you were interviewing, but I was listening the other day to one of the Geek Whisperers, and they were talking about the value of an MBA, and I think like that kind of was what kind of interests me about that is this whole idea of understanding how businesses function, and I think that's the challenge of an IT specialist. Is I kind of talked about it a bit before with the big fish in the little pond, is that you kind of know a subset of a business really well, but it's actually understanding what purpose IT performs within that business, and then understanding the relationships between the different business units. And I've often thought that was kind of one of the things that I was pretty good at, was that idea that I could bridge that gap between the IT and the business. And I think that's kind of what for that progression piece, I think that's an important part, is understanding your place in an organization, and not I love the tech, don't get me wrong, and I'll get my hands dirty any day of the week, I love all that, but it's understanding not just how something works, but actually how why you're implementing it and what the purpose of it is within that
Yep.
organization.
Oh, it's clear. I mean,
Um,
both sides have to come to the table. I think we in IT have to connect a lot more to the business. They have to come to us too. Yeah, that episode was with Keith Townsend. He's Virtualized Geek on Twitter. He took a stint at PwC, the big consulting firm, and now is back in the private sector. But I got to say, he has a vocabulary unlike any other person I've talked to, and and we have had more comments on that episode than any other one. He has a way of looking at things and a way of talking about them that are just is a little not quite like a regular IT person talks about it, and is like an executive talks about it, right? And I can't put my finger on it. I got to hang out with him some more and maybe interview some more consultants or something. But, it was very interesting. It was very subtle that he carries himself and speaks a little bit differently. In fact, he got into an argument on Twitter just the other day about architects and the role of an enterprise architect. And I think what was happening was some people were saying, oh, an enterprise architect should be like a VCDX and should have these qualities. And in his world, an enterprise architect is more business functionality. And so they weren't even, I don't even think they quite realized it. They weren't even really agreeing on the definition. A VCDX is a very technically flavored enterprise architect / designer. Whereas if you work for a multi-billion-dollar company, that enterprise architect might just be an MBA that is non-technical.
Interesting perspective, yeah. Okay. I'll jump on to the next question then. So I kind of asked this of all the guests I have here on. It's really just around Flash, and obviously I work for an old Flash company, so. I'm quite interested to understand your perspective on Flash. I mean, really, storage is going through a big transformation at the moment. There's a lot of incumbents in the market that all have a value prop around what storage can do and what Flash can do. Pretty much, I guess the main ingredient of those storage changes is around Flash. There's also some around things like data analytics and stuff like that. But I think Flash has kind of been the real the wave of change that a lot of these organizations are, are riding on, if you like, at this point in time. Everyone knows that storage in IT is a bit of a bottleneck and has been a problem child for quite a few years now. Do you see, do you think there'll be a mass adoption of Flash, and do you think it'll change how people design and architect environments in the future? What's your perspective on it, John? I'm interested.
Sure. Oh, well, my goodness. Of course, it's incredibly transformative. It was the running joke that with virtualization, at least, anytime something went wrong, it was always the storage, right? And as much as you could try to blame the network or anything else, it was always the storage. So, I mean, that's changing things. I mean, I love examples that I can touch and feel, right? I just recently spilled coffee on my MacBook Air, which is, of course, is all solid state. And I had to switch back to circa 2011 a MacBook Pro with spinning disk, and oh my God, it was like I felt like I was in the 70s. It was terrible. It was so much slower and heavier, and the fan went on, and the thing buzzed, and the thing spun up, and I could hear the disk spinning up and down, and I had totally forgotten, and it's nothing like that to really bring it home very, very quickly that this is a transformative piece of technology. I mean, it felt like a completely different machine. It was a completely different machine. It wasn't even that much slower. It's just the disks were so much slower. So yeah, of course, the Flash is being transformative. Maybe storage won't be the poster child, right? The weird thing is we're doing two different things are happening, right? We're getting closer and closer to the CPU. So we're moving our memory, our storage, our persistent storage closer and closer to the CPU. And in fact, we're even getting these things that things are on the memory bus now, right? So if you really want to get even closer to the CPU, you can do that. And in fact, then these non-volatile memory technologies that are coming down the pike, are going to change it yet again, and they're going to be even bigger capacity. And then at the same time, we're building distributed systems where part of the systems live in the cloud, and so you have huge latencies now. The storage might be fast, but the latencies are high. So you have these interesting architectural changes that are going in opposite directions in the data center and in the in the cloud. And I'm assuming that software is going to paper over all that, and we'll be magically tiering stuff in different places, and everything will just be like magic, and we won't have to ever configure a LUN, and we won't have to ever worry about where our storage is, because they're just going to be multiple copies exactly where we need them. I mean, that's the world we're getting into. I think it just depends on the. I'm not a student of the economics of scale and utility as those fabs pump out more and more flash. But the problem, I think, what I heard was that most of the time, I think most of the flash in the world is being pulled by phones at this point, and the iPhone, and so enterprise flash is actually very little of it.
I think that's kind of the interesting point is that while traditionally new technologies are always enterprise introduced first and then are driven down at consumer at a later date, like with flash it's kind of completely the opposite. It's actually been it's actually been standardized in consumer grade products for some time now, and only now we're actually seeing, obviously due to economic challenges around the cost of it, that we're actually seeing it in the enterprise. So I think that's kind of a different, it's quite a different piece compared to what you traditionally see with technology, with
the economics have changed. Well, it has interesting technological implications. I was recently interviewing a professor of computer science for a Usenix event, Usenix Fast, and I asked him what why he was interested in, what excited him about storage still in an academic sense, and his point, he said, well, big data is very interesting. And some of this cloud stuff is kind of interesting, but the most interesting thing to him was all the software that we have built that has been assuming rotating disks, all the things that have been tuned for that, all the algorithms, all the infrastructure was built for magnetic media, and now it all has to be rewritten because now. Flash has very different characteristics of access and storage and latency and volatility and replication and all that sort of stuff. And so he thought all the file systems, all the backups, all the just basically all this layer above the hardware is all it's all greenfield for him as an academic. So he was pretty excited about that.
So you raised an interesting point there, don't you, around the whole. With introducing new technologies, it means then you have to kind of re-evaluate how you're doing stuff existing, and how, how something's architected, how you actually have to change that. How do I get this new technology in, and then what changes have to happen in my environment to actually, substantiate that move, and then how, what's the cultural and social impact of doing those things within the organization itself?
Yeah.
I mean, it can be transformative. Yeah. We can have a batch database job that used to take 4 hours now takes 10 minutes, but what infrastructure change had to occur to actually make that happen? And that's kind of, I guess, what the business going to look at, the end result, or are they actually going to look at the changes required within the infrastructure to get to that result?
Yeah. Oh, it happens over and over again, every generation. Back in the day when I was doing the wireless enterprise startup, we had a thing going with a lumber company, and they were going to give everybody gadgets and have instant inventory and financials. And we went to do the proof of concept, and the finance people said, well, that's great, except we only run our numbers once a week. So having instant access to everything, we have to change our whole backend. So that was years ago. Even with virtualization, you saw that changed the whole org chart of the IT. People. Sometimes the Windows people became the virtualization people. Sometimes they had a couple different silos. You had to figure out how to make a virtualization team. Processes about server provisioning. Sometimes you could flip a switch for server provisioning in 5 minutes, but it would take 2 weeks to do all the paperwork and go through the change request board and things like that. So again, over and over, and now with Flash and the infrastructure, and now I see it happening with Docker and containers, which can totally transform the deployment process for workloads. One of my friends he interviewed somebody recently, and he was asking them, he's like, you have 5 containers, you have 5 workloads, you have a cluster of 5 machines, and one of them isn't performing well. How would you go and troubleshoot that? And the guy was like, well, and all the machines are the same? And he said, yeah, and they all have containers? And he's like, yeah. Well, I would kill the one that's not performing and just restart it from scratch. And my friend was like, wait a minute, that's not what the answer I expected. He's like, but you said they were all the same. So, and so that's what we do now these days. And he said, oh yeah, I guess that is what we do now. Because he was expecting, SSHN and look at the logs and do performance tuning, because each of our VMs are handcrafted. Even if you use configuration management and Chef and Puppet or Ansible or whatever, right? There's still a temptation to over time they're long-lived workloads, so you fix things or you update things or you tweak things, and all these workloads are not the same in our world, but in the coming world, they're anyway. It changes the whole workflow.
Cattles are not pets, eh?
Yep.
Yeah, interesting stuff. Yeah. So, next question for you, John. Have you got an home lab? Yeah. Do you get your hands on the tools, mate? There's another class question for me. So you're not running a few Intel NUCs in there or something, or I don't know.
That's a young man's game. I have no desire to do that. I used to care about every release and every patch level and every that sort of stuff. I don't care anymore. So no, the reason I work really well with people is that I am technical, but I am not competing with you. So in other words, I think if some people who work as technical evangelists, there's a little bit of ego involved. It's like, I'm the world's expert on X or Y, right? And I'm talking to you about it. I'm not the world's expert on virtualization. I would never design a data center. I would never run a data center. Don't trust me to do that. I don't have a home lab. But I'm technical enough that I understand you. I understand the problems. I understand the features that you're talking about. I understand the cost benefit. I understand process. I understand IT culture. But I don't really give a crap about exactly the order in which one should upgrade all your components of the vCloud suite from 5.5 to 6.0, right? Because there's a very specific order you're supposed to go into. And I've read the KB, but I don't want to do it. So no, I don't have a home lab. Now, there are some things coming out soon. As a client I'm working with, Revelo Systems, if I'll give a little plug here, they've got a really sweet new beta that's coming out where you're going to be able to put your labs up in a public cloud like Google or Amazon, and and use ESX servers and ESXi servers and things like that. So I think one of the challenge of modern day virtualization, right, is we're running out of space on our laptops and our home labs, right? You really need you need a couple hundred gigs of RAM really to do anything interesting, and on an 8 GB laptop, that's just not there. So sure. I think pretty soon people are going to be able to have some interesting home labs in the cloud.
Cool. That sounds really interesting. Yeah.
I hope that plug was okay.
No, it's fine. It's all live here, so whatever you say is going to go out. Don't worry. No post editing in this one. So I was just thinking, I was just wondering if I was just seeing behind you there. I was wondering if that was your home lab. You've got like
It's my cat lab. That's where the cats
live.
That's
it. Yeah.
I guess they've been actually walking around my feet. It's getting to be dinner time for them, so they're wondering where their dinner is.
Cool. Okay. Well, so I've got a last question for you then. I'll just go through that one. You've kind of done something a bit reverse of what most people have done in this industry. So a lot of people have they've gone through the customer space, they've got recognized, and then they've kind of been snapped up by a vendor. Whereas with you, you've kind of done the opposite. You've worked for a vendor, you've established a recognition, and then you've gone independent. So I was just wondering if you could give us any advice and tips around, remaining independent in this industry, because a lot of friends I know who have been independent, are going to. Actually moving back into the vendor space. Myself as well, I did that a couple of years ago as well. Have you got any advice or any tips on remote? Because I found it, it's all about making money at the end of the day and being self-sustaining for money. You look at people like Stephen Foskett who've done it pretty well with, we mentioned Tech Field Day before, but how do you do that?
Well, it's tough. Our ecosystem is such that to be an independent commentator or analyst or consultant is fairly tough. I'm lucky enough that I have some consulting gigs, and they're nice. I'm working with several different vendors, and that's working out really well, and some of those are long-term engagements. But, not all of them are long-term, so I'm constantly on the hunt for new clients and short-term projects and things like that, because I have to pay for this cat tree back there and things like that, right? I
Your
have to
home
pay my
lab.
mortgage. So, I mean, it's interesting being on your own. I mean, one thing I like about it is that I think much like a reseller or channel, like a consultant or reseller, it's nice to be able to not quite be a member of any one person's army. I don't have to. I don't. I've sold VMware and I like VMware and I was happy to represent VMware. But it's kind of nice to be able to it's a nice luxury to be able to look at different options and say, oh, KVM looks interesting too, and Hyper-V has its qualities, which I certainly did while I was employed by VMware. But you are part of a conversation that is talking about the benefits of your product rather than trying to do some buying conditions. I mean, basically, you have to figure out if you want to be independent, either be a customer, because be an actual IT, actual hands-on practitioner. That's a very rewarding profession. You can do a lot of good work. You're doing a lot of problem solving. Be a consultant or VAR, value-added reseller, or something like that, somebody who does reselling or who is a trusted advisor to those people. That's also a nice way of staying independent and still getting a paycheck. And the interesting thing then is, right, you're in a lot of different data centers, and you get to see lots of different people's. You get to solve a lot of different people's problems if you're the kind of person that likes to, parachute in and fix something and then leave. But to be an analyst or a pundit or do what I try to do it is challenging, and that's why we're trying to start up Tech Reckoning. I mean, my goal is that all this community stuff becomes more recognized and becomes a line item in everybody's budget, and I talk with a lot of vendors about that, and we're trying to pin down the ROI and exactly where they would fold it into their marketing budget and why they would do that, and kind of how they would recognize in their marketing function that this did them some good. Because I don't want them to waste their money either. So we're working on that. So the more there are things like the more there are community events, the more there are VMUGs, the more there are stuff like Virtual Design Master and Tech Field Day and people's blogs. The more professional blogs are, and the more professional stuff like this vCatchup stuff is, the more eyeballs are on it. I think that the more value it will have to vendors. But it's Craig, it's a complicated set of relationships, and it's a complicated set of economics. You have to have something of value to someone, to still get paid. Yeah. And some of, like we talked about, some of the structures that used to be there, like our friend Howard Marks is a storage analyst, and he's worked as a journalist in back in PC World. Back in the day when they funded a full lab for him, right? He had a lab that he could work at that they funded, and they paid him well. And now he works he works on white papers and he funds his own lab, and it's a much more challenging gig to do that these days.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think it's geographically as well. I think I guess where you are in the US, there's a lot of there's a lot of opportunity around those kind of pieces, around that. I think for Australia, it tends to be a lot more coalface focused, and so it's not the same. You kind of think that geography wouldn't have such a big influence, but I think it does still. I think that's kind of even though we're all kind of talking about globally.
Yeah, I mean, I am in the middle of Silicon Valley. Well, I'm on the edge of Silicon Valley, actually. So, it's like an hour away, but 45 minutes away. So, when I start talking to a new client, and I've just started talking to a new startup that just raised its first money, and it's with some people who had a previous startup, and now this is their next one, and I got introduced by a mutual friend who's also in the Valley, and they said, hey, come over, let's have coffee. I went over. They didn't have an office yet. I went and had coffee with them. We had coffee twice, we talked about stuff, and now I'm working on their launch out of stealth. So, that kind of thing happens because I'm next door. And I agree, it would be really hard to do from Australia.
Yeah, it's cool. It's interesting. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, all right, John. I think we'll wrap it up. Yeah, with that's good 6 questions. Yeah, I appreciate you coming on to the catch up, and thanks for coming. Oh, go on. Sorry.
Yeah. Oh, I had so much fun. This was a blast. This was a fun conversation. I hope it was interesting. I don't think I talked quite as long as Mike Laverick, though. We did about an hour, maybe.
Nah, he's got the record, I think, still. Yeah. But thanks for coming to Australia as well and doing the keynotes for the user conferences, because it was, that a lot of people weren't sure, with the planning of it, weren't sure whether we should have someone like yourself come on. But I was kind of really adamant of the idea of the whole community focus, and I don't know if you're I mean, I think we've published a slide deck that you did for the keynote as part of the after event slides that we present. But I don't know if you're going to show that somewhere else, or if you're going to put it onto the
Sure,
blog or
sure.
something like that.
Yeah, it's up on SlideShare right now. I probably should do a blog post. I hope it was well received, Craig. I mean, I tried. I got good comments from it, and some people, I think the people that it resonated with really resonated with, and I'm happy about that. If people did want some deep dive into technology, I mean, I guess they might have been a little disappointed. I hope you didn't. I hope you got pretty good feedback.
No, and that's kind of my point is that like it's more around having that community representation and having that independent view. And I mean, I've had people like Stephen Foskett come in the past, and it's purely because of that. Is that it's great to have the deep dive, it's great to get the technology understand, but it's also interesting to look at the broader picture. So about different technologies, but also about how people are doing stuff in other parts of the world, and how how this community's developed and changed in the last few years, and what it's about. It's not just it is about the technology, obviously, but there's other factors as well that need to be considered. And it's really about this whole us getting together and actually talking about these things, and there's a percentage of this just around having these debates and having these conversations and determining what's best fit and determining what's right. And I think that's kind of what all these different vehicles do, is give these people a chance to come together. We often use VBeers as a moniker for the same thing as well, as people come together, they chew the fat, and they solve the world's problems, or world's technical problems maybe. But that's kind of the concept of it. And I think that's you said before about the the live going to the conferences and stuff. That's a key part of this, is people getting these, I call it like a reality check, getting this understanding of that, like, is what I'm doing right? Are other people having the same problems as me? So on and so forth. So I think it's kind of really important to do that, yeah.
Yeah, Craig. I mean, we all have decades of work ahead of us, so I think it's worth thinking about the work itself and talking about the work itself. And then we also, we spend millions of dollars on this stuff. It's worth doing a little bit of a meta conversation about how are we running our careers? How are we running our IT departments? Is my IT department running well? Well, how should I develop my skills so that I do have a decades-long career that I love? Right? Am I in the right job? Should I be looking elsewhere? How are IT departments run? So it's worth. It's great to be focused. I love sitting at a project and and just working for 24 hours, and just getting into it. But it's worth pulling, sitting up and pulling our heads out of our computers every now and then, and asking those kind of higher level meta questions, right? And because we all want to have a life that was a good life, and I think that's part of what this conversation is all about.
Cool, perfect thing to end it on. Thanks, John. Appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. It was a blast.